I have a question for you. Do you have a mountain-moving faith? Our guest today will tell us about that, as well as her fascinating career as a journalist, essayist, and book author. Today's guest writes about mountain-moving faith by day and scintillating mystery by night. You won't want to miss today's edition of The Inside Story.
Welcome to another episode of The Inside Story, exclusively on Liftable.tv. They say everyone has a book in them, but turning that desire into a compelling story can seem overwhelming. That's where The Inside Story comes in. Your host, Walt Larimore, is himself an author of over 40 books. Walt's goal in every episode is to inspire and entertain you by spending quality time with best-selling authors and having conversations about the art and the heart of writing. In this episode, you'll be encouraged and equipped to lean into your own writing dream and pick up some insider tips and tricks of the trade. Grab a cup of coffee and get ready for The Inside Story on Liftable.tv.
Hi, I'm Walt Larimore, and I'm so glad you're joining me in my home library for The Inside Story. Our guest today is an award-winning journalist, author, essayist, and novelist who writes story of faith during the day and mystery at night. Her most recent novel, a 1920s mystery novel, All That Is Secret, was just released by Tyndale House. She and her husband Dan have 2 grown daughters and 5 grandchildren. The Inside Story is pleased to welcome back Patricia Raybon. Welcome back.
Thank you,
Walt. It is. I'm delighted to have you back.
Likewise.
I want you to teach and preach as we start here, and let me explain to you guys what I'm talking about. So your book, I Told the Mountain to Move, was a 2006 Book of the Year finalist in Christianity Today magazine annual book awards competition. I've always asked my guests their strongest spiritual discipline, their weakest, and mine's prayer. And I've never understood the scripture about the mountain moving. Will you teach me and encourage me?
I'd be happy to, because I can relate to not understanding. I did not know that it's not about us moving mountains. It's about us moving closer to the mountain mover. I learned that the hard way. I've been married for 45 years, and marriages have ups and downs. And we hit one of those down periods, and I was struggling with grown daughters, and my prayers were not moving my mountains. I had to write a book to figure out that when Jesus said, if you have the faith of a mustard seed, and we all know how small that is.
It's the smallest of the seeds, right? Is that what they say?
That doesn't surprise me if people say that. But if you have just a little bitty faith, you can tell a mountain to move if we move to the mountain mover.
So it's that relationship first, and then that dependence upon him. It's not me naming and claiming a mountain to move, but growing to know more deeply and sweetly he who claims to be able to do that. Am I getting that?
You're getting it. And since we are in Colorado, I can physically see that. Every time I'm on I-25 driving along the Front Range, sometimes Pikes Peak appears almost to move. If the road turns a certain way, the Longs Peak going north is the same way. The mountain hasn't moved. I've moved. And when we as believers move closer to the one who moves our mountains, not only will they move, when he speaks, they will crumble.
That's a great sermon. We'll be taking the offertory up by the end of the show for Patricia's ministry. Patricia, to move on to the writing, you talk about how you write about faith during the day and mystery at night. What do you mean by that?
Honestly, that is some branding language, and I will say that because one of the things that authors have to do is decide where do they sit in the marketplace. And once I decided to write mysteries after writing about faith for so many years, I tried to find a clever way to say that. And that's really what that is, that I write faith by day and mystery by night. I don't actually do that, but it gives some people something to hang on to. And it reminds me of this, Walt. It reminds me that writing is not just the words. At some point, it becomes a commercial endeavor, a commercial enterprise. And that tests a lot of us as writers who love the work of writing. And then we have to put on another hat and become solo entrepreneurs. So that goes in that bucket. That phrase goes in that bucket.
For young writers or people who want to be writers, how do they develop that the two sides? I mean, you've got the writing side, but if you're going to self-publish, it's fine if you just publish a few books. But if you're going to publish with a traditional publisher, it has to sell to pay the expenses. How do you develop that? How do you recommend to young writers they develop that sensibility?
I think making peace with the demands and then doing the work to learn as much as one can about the publishing side of it. You know, I can talk and think about writing all day, but then I had to invest and go to conferences and, writing workshops and watch webinars on television and listen to writing friends give me suggestions on how they do the marketing. And then I learned that marketing, at the end of the day, is not about selling. It's about all the ways you can help people. And it took me a long time to get my arms around that because the word marketing just has a sound to it. But marketing is really about ministry and serving people, and then they respond to that.
You know, what popped into my mind, I've not thought about this maybe in a couple decades, but maybe 45, 50 years ago, I read a book called The Greatest Salesman in the World, written by a man called Og Mandino.
Dina, right.
Have you read it? And that was his whole thing, was sales isn't trying to persuade or push something on someone. It's just getting to know someone, what they need, and whether you can provide that or not. Well, I've not thought of it till now, but as a writer, we have to do the same thing.
Right. It's hard because most of us, or many of us, we're just not wired that way. So speaking of prayer, I've spent a lot of time in prayer. In fact, even questioned my calling as a writer because I found the marketing such a hard nut to crack. But it's like anything, as you stay with it and keep working at it, then at some point you find that you are inspiring, encouraging, helping, and people are responding.
You said earlier that your favorite word was hope and that you love helping people. And so it's what you're saying, that marketing becomes a way to help and give hope. You've reframed it in a way that fits who you are.
I'm a regular contributor to Our Daily Bread, and that ministry has writing retreats for its writing teams. And the last time we had one, we were all in a smart room connected to their writers all over the world because it's a global ministry. And I remember this, Walt, I'll never forget this, that the people in other parts of the world were saying, don't forget when you're writing that people need hope.
Wow. That's a good lesson.
Yeah.
You trained as a journalist, you wrote essays, but then you, if I heard what you said right, you had to go through additional learning of the craft of writing books. And that took writers' conferences, talking with other writers, of increasing your craft. Is that...
And reading. One of the best ways to learn how to write well is to read good writing. And those books are easy to find. You know, they're bestsellers, they're award winners, and the time that a writer spends developing your library and doing that reading. And I was talking to my husband today about committing to learning the different writing formats. I write devotionals. Well, that's different than personal essays that I love to write too. That's different than an op-ed. I love to write those. That's different than a news article. I love writing those. So it's doing the work.
You've had to learn multiple crafts. And now historical mystery. Yes. Explain that genre to me. I understand mystery. I understand historical fiction. Is it putting the two together?
For me, it was a way to let the underdog get into the conversation about what happened. Winners write history. I wanted to write a story about somebody who wasn't on the winning side and find out if I put that character in play, what would she do? What choices would she make? What would she encounter? How would she come out? And it was just a fascinating challenge.
I ask writers under this idea that some writers outline, down to the chapter, the scene. Others sort of fly by the seats of their pants, pantsers. Where would you fall in that categorization?
I'm the pantser.
Are you?
Yes.
So, but do you have a sense of where you're going, or does it literally open up page by page?
Paragraph by paragraph. Oh. Once I learned who the characters needed to be, in fiction there are certain archetypes that enhance fiction. So you have your hero, then you have your anti-hero. You have your smart old woman or smart old man. And it's all those, the love interest, the fake ally, the ally. And so once your characters are arranged, then put them on the page and let them go. And
do they write themselves?
They invite me into their story. And I call it pants on fire writing. I never knew from day to day what they were going to do. Well, let me clarify that. In a novel, and I'm learning as I write them, structure matters, and certain story beats matter. So things have to happen. Well, you've written a novel. So things have to happen in the plot to keep, at a certain time, to keep the reader engaged and keep the story moving. I spent more time reading about that, at least as much time reading about that as I did writing my first
And then
novel.
reading other people who've written that genre.
Right.
And I don't think I've interviewed or ever talked to an author who's published who's not also a reader. I don't know that you could be.
So really, but I'll say this, it really helped to know what was supposed to happen next in the story. And so I remember just running into my husband's office saying, "You'll never guess what happened."
What this character did. Yeah. How do you approach your writing? What time do you write? How long do you write? How do you avoid distractions?
Well, it doesn't get done unless you sit down and do it. And so when I had to write book 2 for this mystery series, I knew it was due imminently. And I had just heard a writer on a program say that every morning he gets up and writes his 1,000 words. He edits what he wrote the day before, writes the 1,000 words, and then no matter what happens the rest of the day, he's written those 1,000. And so that was the practice I used to finish book 2. And of course, once you get started, many days you write more than 1,000 words.
Do you have a way of avoiding those emails, pop-ups, phones, distractions, anything that you have found successful there?
No. I have a writing friend who I know turns all of that off. And I haven't done that yet. I need to. But when I'm in those 1,000 words, I'm just doing that. And the work, over time, what was started out as one page, pretty soon it is a book.
Step by step, right? Or
right.
Bird by bird, as Annie Lamott would say. So, writing mystery, writing faith, but research. Do you do research? How do you do research?
Macro and micro. The big research for me for my novel, which takes place in the 1920s in Colorado, during a time when the Ku Klux Klan ruled the state. So I started out reading a lot of very good histories about the Klan in Colorado in that era. I listened to oral histories through the Denver Public Library's wonderful digital collection. There's another website, Walt, called the Colorado Historical Newspapers, which has in their database hundreds of old Colorado newspapers published from the time before Colorado was a state. Wonderful resource. So
it's not like the old days where we'd have to go get the microfiche.
No.
And I mean, it's really gotten
all
easier.
online.
And for our viewers, almost anywhere you live now, newspaper collections are digitized, and sometimes you pay a subscription to this site or that site.
But it's available. It's out there.
It's amazing. And would you come across an article and take notes, or just
I would
save
just read the paper, just like I do now. Fascinating to find out what was happening in a particular city on a particular day, the police blotter, what the city council was doing, and this and the other. So I got a feeling of the times and the people, and then those oral histories, you can hear them talk about what's going on.
it makes a difference to hear it done.
Absolutely.
Because you hear their voice,
Their
and
voices.
rather than reading it in your voice. Is that
Right, you hear their voice.
Wow. Do you ever get writer's block?
I've never had the luxury. In a newsroom,
You just got to write.
You're always on deadline.
But that's a good lesson for writers, is sit down, either edit, research, write, but that's your work, that's your call, that's your job, that's your vocation.
But here's the thing. If I get to a place where I'm stuck, I will physically move myself. Maybe go downstairs and get a glass of water, walk around the block. In the newsroom, you would see this a lot. People just popping up and down from their desk to physically move themselves from whatever was blocking them. And then sometimes I will go iron or wash dishes, something to take me away from the work. So what's trying to speak to me can flow in, sort of from the other side of your brain.
So Patricia, when you start a manuscript or an essay, devotion, any of the things you're writing, what's the most difficult part for you?
It's not difficult. I was saying to somebody, and let me clarify that, because writing is hard work. I was saying to somebody recently, I love it so much that it never has felt like work. And I think maybe it's because I understand, don't start the writing until I'm ready. So I will know I'm doing an essay or a chapter, and then while I'm doing something else, the words that start it will come. And then I'll go upstairs and write down that opening. Sometimes when I'm sleeping, I'll wake up and hear the words, and now I know to get up and go write them down.
Yeah, I've heard some people say when that dream or those words come at night, don't depend that you'll remember them. I mean, literally get up and write them. Well, it strikes me that authors who love to write, how do you stop? In other words, how does it not consume you, impact your marriage, your ministry, other areas? Do you have to put limits on it?
I do, because I could just, go write all day, all night, and you can't. You have a life, you have a family. So I learned, here's my answer, Walt. I learned to listen to my husband. And he'll say, you've been at it enough. It's time to take a break. And I've learned to listen to that and follow his suggestions.
Well, I heard someone recently talking about marriage, the biblical view of marriage, looking at actually the Hebrew description of early marriage in Genesis chapter 2, of a man facing his wife, his woman, his spouse for the first time. And he said it's God's perfect design that they face each other, because if you were Barb, you can see things I can't. And I can see things you can't. And silly would be the spouse who wouldn't want to have that input. I think that's Terrific, terrific advice.
Can I say one other thing about
Absolutely.
that? While you're talking about spouses, one of my best editors is my husband. They're probably spouses who will look at a manuscript and say, "Oh, that's good, honey." Dan always has a good hard question. And so I depend on him, even for, those devotionals I write for Our Daily Bread, they are maximum 240 words. You can sort of sneeze, 240 words can be hard to write to, to get the right words. But he always has a good question for me that allows me to go back and get deeper and better at what I was trying to say.
Barb was an English teacher, and so she actually buys red pens by the case to help me with editing. But I had given her something to read, and one day I walked in and she had tears flowing down her face. And I said, finally, it's really that good. And she goes, "No, this is so bad." She's got tears. So, but it wouldn't have got better without that. We're not enemies. We're on the same team, and she wants the best.
I actually think in heaven there's a reward for the author's spouse.
And maybe the same thing for a physician's spouse, too. A couple final questions in the few minutes we have left. You founded the writing ministry at your church in Denver. I've never heard of there may be, I just had never heard of a writing ministry in a church. I found that fascinating. What led to your ministry? Tell me about it.
Well, first, it selfishly was me looking for more time because everybody wants to write a book, or a lot of people do. And I would get question after question, "Can you tell me how to get published? Would you read my manuscript?" And so I thought maybe if I get everybody in one room at one time, we can answer all these questions at once. But what happened is that a lot of people discovered in the process of being in the ministry that they really didn't want to write a book. They just had something to express, and they wanted somebody to listen. So the writing ministry provided that. But the other thing that we did is start producing products for the church. We did church magazines. During Lent, we produced Lenten devotional guides. During Advent devotional guides. And we became a community.
And still together.
The pandemic
has limited that.
Has limited that.
Well, that speaks to a limited time that we have here to finish, but let me run through some quick questions. Ready for rapid fire questions? What's your favorite book of all time, excluding the Bible?
Cry, The Beloved Country. Do you know Alan Payton's book?
Oh, gosh. What's the most satisfying part of writing for you?
Seeing other people enjoy it.
The difficult part?
Knowing that I don't have the last word, and that's a good thing.
It's a good lesson to learn. What are you glad you learned early in your writing career?
That the writing's not about me, it's about the people who are reading it.
What do you wish someone had told you earlier in your writing career?
Some people will be breakout stars. They'll be A-listers. Some people will be steady Eddies. Both are okay.
In your writing career, what's brought you the most joy?
The actual privilege of doing the work.
The most heartache?
Not reaching a level that I had hoped. I thought I wanted to be a big writing star. Now I'm just glad to write those 240-word devotionals for Our Daily Bread.
When you get frustrated or angry when you're writing, What word or phrase do you mutter under your breath?
That's a trick question, right? Probably Jesus, Jesus, Jesus.
You go. What writer, living or past, would you most like to have dinner with?
Howard Thurman. Do you know Howard Thurman, the theologian?
Wow. When you're in heavenly glory, what would you most like to hear from your readers that you've never met?
What a good book.
There you go. Patricia Raybon, you've written some, and thank you for blessing us and our viewers. Thank you for being part of the Inside Story and sharing yours.
Thanks for having me here.
You bet. Before we end today's program, if you have a comment or suggestion or an author you'd like me to interview, just email me at insidestory@liftable.tv. In addition, if you'd like to subscribe to one of my blogs or newsletters, just sign up at drwalt.com. That's drwalt.com. And until our next visit, remember the words of the psalmist who wrote, God rewrote the text of my life when I opened the book of my heart to his eyes. And may his and your writing be blessed.
Thanks for watching this episode of The Inside Story, hosted by Walt Larimore. If you have comments about the show or there's an author you'd love to hear from, email Walt at insidestory@liftable.tv.